Welcome back to my YouTube channel. The church smelled of lilies and sorrow. Candles flickered softly against the stained glass windows, painting the pews with colors that seemed too alive for a day so heavy. My hands clenched the fabric of my dress. Simple, black, and unbranded. It wasn't flashy, and I hadn't intended it to be. I had chosen it to honor Mom the way she taught me. With dignity, not display. But my sister, sharp-tongued and sharp-dressed, couldn't resist. Her whisper was just loud enough for the row to hear. Of course you'd wear something that looks like it came from a bargain bin. Some things never change. The words sliced deeper than they should have. My cheeks burned, but I didn't respond. Around us, family members shifted uncomfortably. Some hiding smirks, others pitying me. In that moment, I felt like the little girl who was always underestimated, always compared, always falling short in their eyes. But silence, I've learned, is not weakness. It's strategy. What my sister didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the cheap dress on my body was from a collection that had sold out in less than 48 hours in New York, Paris, and Tokyo. What she didn't know was that the very empire she dismissed with her mockery had been built by my own 2 hands, fueled by nights of stitching samples, mornings of rejection emails, and years of being told, fashion isn't for people like you. I remembered Mom's words when I had once come home crying after being laughed at for wearing thrifted clothes in high school. She had lifted my chin and said, "Style isn't about labels. It's about how you carry what you wear, and how you carry yourself." Those words became my mantra. From the cracked apartment floors where I sketched designs by candlelight when the power went out, to the tiny workshop where I hired seamstresses who needed second chances, I built something the world said I couldn't. Piece by piece, risk by risk, I grew my little dream into a $2.4 billion fashion empire. And yet, in this church, surrounded by my own blood, I was still seen as the lesser sister. I could have stood up then. I could have revealed it all, let the truth crash over them like a tidal wave, but I didn't, not then, not at Mom's funeral, because success, real success, doesn't scream, it simply is. Later, as whispers spread and my story inevitably came out, through articles, interviews, the sudden realization that my last name matched the one etched across luxury storefronts. The same relatives who smirked now called me inspiring. My sister's laughter at my expense turned into stunned silence. But by then I had already forgiven her, because the truth is, her mockery wasn't about me. It was about her own insecurities. What I want you to take from this isn't revenge, or the sweet taste of being proven right. It's this. Never let someone else's perception define your worth. People will laugh, they will doubt, they will mock. Let them, use it. Let their disbelief become your fire. Because one day, the very things they once ridiculed you for may become the empire you build. And when that day comes, you won't need to announce it. Your work, your resilience, your legacy, it will speak for itself. So wear your cheap clothes. Dream your impossible dreams. Build your unrealistic empire. Because the world doesn't decide your value. You do. The church smelled of lilies and sorrow. Candles flickered softly against the stained glass windows, painting the pews with colors that seemed too alive for a day so heavy. My hands clenched the fabric of my dress. Simple, black, and unbranded. It wasn't flashy, and I hadn't intended it to be. I had chosen it to honor Mom the way she taught me, with dignity, not display. The air was thick with grief, and every breath I took seemed weighted with memories of her voice, her laugh, her unwavering belief in me. As the organ played its slow, mournful notes, I felt like the walls themselves were holding me tighter than any person could. Faces I hadn't seen in years were all gathered, some with genuine sadness, others with a kind of polite performance, as if grief were a costume they only wore for occasions like this. My heart ached, not just from the loss, but from the heaviness of the atmosphere, where love and judgment intertwined in the same space. I could feel the eyes on me, measuring, comparing, always assessing. That was the thing about my family. Every gathering was an unspoken competition, even when we should have been united by grief. And there I sat, wishing only to mourn my mother quietly, to honor her in my own way, yet knowing that in this room, silence was never left untouched. But my sister, sharp-tongued and sharp-dressed, couldn't resist. Her whisper was just loud enough for the Rao to hear, the kind of cutting remark designed to sting and humiliate. Of course, you'd wear something that looks like it came from a bargain bin. Some things never change. The words slipped out of her mouth effortlessly, coated in mockery, and I felt them land like stones in the quiet sanctuary. A few cousins shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between us, torn between amusement and disapproval. One aunt pressed her lips together to suppress a smirk, while another gave me that pitying look I had grown so accustomed to over the years. My sister sat tall, her designer dress hugging her frame like it had been tailored just for her, her jewelry catching the candlelight as if to underline her status. She knew what she was doing. She always knew. It wasn't just about the clothes. It was about the hierarchy she had built in her mind, where she stood above me, the successful one, the admired one, the one who could afford to wear grief in glamour. She wanted me small, diminished, the quiet shadow at the edge of the family picture. I could feel the heat rise to my face, a familiar burn of shame mixed with anger, but I bit down on it. The funeral wasn't the place for retaliation. Not here, not today. I lowered my gaze, fingers brushing against the fabric of my dress as if reminding myself why I chose it. Her words echoed, but beneath them I carried something she could never touch, the truth of who I had become. My cheeks burned, but I didn't respond. The silence between us stretched, heavy and unyielding, but I held onto it like armor. Around me, the murmurs of the service continued, the priest's voice rising and falling in prayer. But my mind lingered on her words, replaying them over and over. I wanted to lash out, to tell her how wrong she was, to strip away her smugness with the truth, but I didn't. I kept my mouth closed, not out of fear, but out of choice. There's a certain power in restraint, in knowing you don't need to defend yourself to those who have already decided who you are. My sister thought her words had reduced me, that she had won some invisible contest. But what she didn't understand was that silence can be louder than any retort. Behind my calm expression, I carried a secret that would one day render her mockery meaningless. I reminded myself that dignity doesn't demand an audience, and strength doesn't always roar. It often waits. I sat there quietly, letting her think she had the upper hand, while inside me there was a calm certainty. I knew who I was. I knew what I had built, and I knew that one day, the world, including her, would see it too. I remembered the long nights that had carried me here, the ones where exhaustion wrapped around me like a second skin, yet I still pushed forward. There were nights when I sat in a cramped apartment, hunched over a sewing machine that rattled like it was begging to give up. My fingers raw from pinpricks, but my heart burning with an idea I refused to let die. Rent was often late, meals were often skipped, and every rejection letter felt like a nail sealing me inside a box the world thought I belonged in. But I kept going. I thought back to the early days when I sold sketches for a few dollars just to keep the lights on, and how I'd search through thrift stores for fabrics no one wanted, transforming them into something people couldn't stop talking about. I remembered the fashion shows I wasn't invited to, the doors that were closed in my face, and the smirks from people who thought I was chasing an impossible dream. Still, I rose earlier every morning, stitched later into every night, because I knew the vision I carried was bigger than their doubt. My journey was not a straight road, but a winding one, paved with failure, heartbreak, and moments where walking away would have been the easier choice. Yet through every stumble, I carried Mom's words. Style isn't about labels. It's about how you carry what you wear and how you carry yourself. Those words became the thread holding me together when everything else tried to pull me apart. What my sister didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the dress she sneered at was not just a cheap piece of fabric. It was one of mine. It belonged to a collection I had released under a label I deliberately kept detached from my family name, a label that had taken the fashion world by storm. That very dress had sold out within hours in cities like New York, Paris, and Tokyo. Celebrities had worn it on red carpets, models had strutted it down runways, and critics had praised its understated elegance. To her it looked plain. To the world it was art. What she didn't know was that behind closed doors, while she bragged about promotions and purses, I had built something staggering, a global fashion empire valued at $2.4 billion, and I had done it quietly, without parading it at family dinners or flashing it across social media. Every store that carried my brand, every magazine spread, every sold-out collection was a piece of me, stitched with determination, resilience, and vision. Yet to my family, I was still the one who never quite measured up. I had grown comfortable in their blindness. There was a strange freedom in being underestimated. It gave me space to work, to dream, to create without the weight of their expectations. And so I let them talk, let them laugh, let them dismiss me, while all the while, I was building something none of them could even imagine. Later, when the truth began to trickle into their world, the shift was almost palpable. It started small, an aunt casually mentioning she had seen my brand featured in a magazine, a cousin recognizing the label on a storefront in Milan, whispers connecting the dots between the name in bold letters and the quiet sister they had always dismissed. Soon enough, it was undeniable. The family who once smirked at my cheap clothes realized they had been mocking the very architect of an empire they could barely comprehend. My sister, the one so quick to belittle me in front of others, could no longer hide her shock when she saw my face on a television interview. My story told in glossy spreads, my work celebrated by voices louder than hers could ever be. I saw it in her eyes, the disbelief, the crumbling of the pedestal she had built for herself at my expense. Relatives who once overlooked me began leaning closer, asking questions laced with admiration instead of judgment. They wanted to know how I had done it, as though the years of being invisible could suddenly be rewritten into some overnight miracle. But for me, there was no triumph in their change of tone. I didn't need their validation. I had learned long ago that respect built on revelation is not the same as respect built on belief. The power had shifted, yes, but what mattered most was that it no longer weighed on me. Their opinions had lost the ability to wound. I had already won long before they realized it. What I took from that moment, and from every sting of mockery that had preceded it, was something deeper than vindication. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving myself right. I understood then that people will always measure you by the yardstick of their own limitations, and if you let them, their narrow vision will shrink your dreams until they no longer fit you. But if you hold fast to your own vision, if you carry it with stubborn faith, it can grow into something so vast it silences every doubt without you ever needing to raise your voice. My mother's words still echoed in me. Style is not in the label, it is in the bearing. And I realized that had been the thread not just of my career, but of my life. The way I carried myself when I had nothing, the way I carried myself when they laughed, the way I carried myself in silence at her funeral. It was all part of the same tapestry. Success was never about glitter or applause. It was about resilience stitched into the fabric of who I was. So when people ask me now how I built a $2.4 billion fashion empire, I tell them this. I listened when the world doubted me, but I didn't let it drown me. I carried every insult, every slight, every closed door like a seed, and I planted them until they bloomed. If you're mocked for dreaming too big, keep dreaming. If they laugh at your beginnings, keep building. Because one day, what they tried to belittle might just become the very thing that defines you.